The cold wind cut through the narrow alley behind the busy cafe, carrying the faint aroma of roasted coffee beans mixed with exhaust fumes. John Mitchell sat on a piece of crumpled cardboard, his few belongings wrapped in a worn-out duffel bag beside him. His face was lined with years of hardship, his eyes distant as he pulled his tattered coat tighter around his shoulders. People passed by without a second glance, wrapped up in their own worlds, oblivious to the man who had once risked his life for his country. John had seen better days, far better. He had served in the Gulf War, a proud soldier, strong and determined. But war changes a man. The echoes of gunfire, the screams of fallen comrades, the relentless uncertainty of survival, it all left a mark. When he returned home, he found himself battling an enemy he couldn't see. The memories that haunted his dreams, the anxiety that clung to him like a shadow. Finding a job became impossible. Relationships crumbled. Eventually, he lost everything. The streets became his reality, a world where every day was a fight for survival. He had learned to disappear into the background, to blend into the city's shadows where no one would look too closely. As he sat in the alley, trying to ignore the biting cold, the back door of the cafe swung open. A man in his early 40s, dressed in a crisp uniform, stepped out, looking irritated. His eyes scanned John with thinly veiled disgust. "Hey, you can't sit here. You're scaring the customers away," the man snapped. John met his gaze but said nothing. He had heard these words 100 times before. There was no point in arguing. He gathered his belongings and prepared to move, but the manager stepped closer, his voice hardening. "I said move, or I'm calling the cops." John exhaled slowly, rising to his feet. His knees ached, his body protesting against the movement. He picked up his bag and turned to leave, but it was too late. A police cruiser had already pulled up, lights flashing. 2 officers approached, their expressions unreadable. "Sir, we received a call about a trespasser," one of them said. "Do you have anywhere else to go?" John shook his head. "Just trying to stay warm." The officers exchanged glances. One of them sighed. "I'm sorry, but we have to take you in. Trespassing is still trespassing." John didn't resist. He had learned long ago that fighting back never helped. As they led him to the car, he kept his head down, the weight of his circumstances pressing heavily upon him. The ride to the station was silent, the only sound the occasional crackle of the radio. Once they arrived, he was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell. He sat on the cold metal bench, staring at the floor, waiting for the inevitable court appearance. The next morning, John found himself in front of a judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through him. The prosecutor read out his charges: trespassing, loitering. Nothing serious, but enough to put another mark on his record. When asked to speak, John hesitated. What was the point? No one cared about his story. No one wanted to hear about his past. But something in the judge's expression told him otherwise. There was a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even understanding. Taking a deep breath, he decided to speak. "Your Honor," he began, his voice rough from years of hardship. "I served in the Gulf War. I fought for this country. When I came back, I couldn't find my place. I tried, but the nightmares, the memories, they wouldn't let me. I lost my job, my family. I lost everything. Now I just try to get by. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I just needed a place to rest." The courtroom fell silent. Even the prosecutor seemed taken aback. The judge studied him for a long moment, then leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, do you have any support? Any family, any assistance?" John shook his head. "No, ma'am." She sighed, tapping her pen against the desk. Then, in a decision that would change his life forever, she looked at the prosecutor. "I'm dismissing the charges. But I'm not just letting him walk out of here. I want social services involved. Mr. Mitchell deserves help, not a jail cell." Murmurs spread through the room. The bailiff nodded and stepped forward, gently leading John away. He didn't know what to say. He had expected punishment, another strike against him. Instead, he was given a chance. Word of his case spread quickly. A local reporter picked up the story, and within days, John Mitchell's name was everywhere. People were outraged that a veteran had been left to fend for himself on the streets. Donations poured in. Veteran support organizations reached out. Strangers offered jobs, housing, anything to help him get back on his feet. And then the most unexpected thing happened. The White House called. John sat in disbelief as he was told the president himself had heard his story and wanted to honor him. A special ceremony was arranged, one that would recognize his service and acknowledge the struggles veterans like him faced every day. He was flown to Washington, given a suit, his first real clothing in years, and prepared to stand before the nation. The day of the ceremony arrived, and John found himself standing in a grand hall, surrounded by decorated officials, influential figures, and fellow veterans. When his name was called, he stepped forward, his hands trembling. The president shook his hand, then turned to the audience. John Mitchell is not just a veteran. He is a hero. And like too many of our heroes, he was forgotten. That ends today. Applause erupted. John felt tears sting his eyes as a Medal of Honor was placed around his neck. Not for his past service alone, but for his endurance, his strength in the face of unimaginable hardship. Cameras flashed. The world was watching. And for the first time in decades, John felt seen. When the ceremony ended, he was approached by people eager to help him rebuild his life. A business owner offered him a job. A shelter provided him with a place to stay until he could get on his feet. And more than anything, he felt the warmth of a community that had once turned its back on him. Days turned into weeks. John moved into a small apartment, started working, and even began therapy to address the wounds that had never fully healed. The nightmares still came, but they weren't as suffocating anymore. He found himself talking to other veterans, sharing his story, offering them hope. Because if he could rise from rock bottom, maybe they could too. One evening, as he sat on his small balcony, he looked out at the city. The lights shimmered, the sounds of life carrying on below. He was no longer invisible. No longer just another forgotten soldier. He had been given a second chance. And for the first time in a long, long time, John Mitchell allowed himself to believe in the possibility of a better tomorrow.